when somebody shares and entrusts us with their story, and then we take that story and we dump it into a machine to synthesize it and process it in the most effective way, that's both disrespectful and dangerous.
Welcome to the Nonprofit Fundraising Exchange, a podcast from IPM Advancement. We believe strong nonprofits can change the world, and at IPM, our job is to make sure your organization is one of them. With each episode, our goal is to bring you insightful conversations with thought leaders from across the nonprofit sector. Are you ready? Let's go. Hello, listeners. I'm your host, Russ Phaneuf, and I'm glad you're able to join us for this episode. This is a topic I think about often, and I've been discussing it more and more with colleagues in the nonprofit sector: the ethical use of AI in nonprofit storytelling and messaging. You've probably found that AI can be extremely helpful with certain tasks in your nonprofit career. You may use it for research or for brainstorming strategy, or as a thought partner in writing for projects. Personally, when I use it, I have a clear line in my mind about what's okay for AI to do and what isn't. And I make sure not to cross that line, even when it might save me time. You probably have a line too, an internal sense of what's ethical and what's problematic. But where did this line come from? Should we as an industry share that same line? What are the consequences for crossing that line? And if you have a line that you won't cross, but there are others who will, do you feel like you'll get left behind? These are the kinds of questions we'll grapple with today. And joining me is one of my favorite experts on narrative strategy and storytelling, Josh Gryniewicz. Welcome, Josh.
Thank you, Russ. It's good to be back.
It's good to have you back. Now, Josh has been here many, many times as a guest. He also has his own interview series here on NPFX. His first interview this year just came out. It's about knocking down barriers to grant funding. And so please check it out. We'll put a link in the show notes. But today, Josh and I will be talking about where AI fits into nonprofit storytelling, where it can genuinely help, where it can become ethically challenging, and what fundraisers and leaders should be thinking about as they use these tools. We'll explore some challenges organizations are facing, the opportunities AI might open up, and some uncomfortable truths about how the sector approaches storytelling, and what it might take to use this technology responsibly while still doing our jobs well. So Josh, to start off, from the perspective of strategic storytelling, what's the most pressing challenge facing nonprofit fundraisers and leaders right now regarding the ethical use of AI in their messaging? And why is that challenge so critical to address?
Yeah, I want to start with an analogy. So there's this scene in Breaking Bad. It's a flashback to when Walter White was just a chemistry student, and he's with his colleagues, and they're figuring out on the board, okay, what percentage of the human body is hydrogen? What percent is oxygen? What percent is carbon? And they get through, and it adds up to about 99.88%. And so the implication in the episode, Russ, is that what's missing in these tiny trace elements is what makes us human. Mm-hmm. And I think AI storytelling is doing something similar right now, which is to say, I think it can replicate 99%, maybe even 99.88%, but it consistently misses the part that actually makes us feel something. And in nonprofit communication, whether it's an appeal letter or messaging or positioning statement, the thing that makes people feel is the thing that actually is our strategic advantage.
Right.
That is the game changer.
Yeah.
So the biggest challenge is that AI has dramatically lowered the cost of producing stories, but it's also lowered the signal of what's real.
Right.
And so the job now is not just telling a good story, it's proving it's a human one. And we're seeing this flood of content that all sounds eerily similar, right? And you've seen it. You've seen it. And there's a reason for that. So in stylemetry, which is actually the study of writing style, how it's structured, right? We know that AI-generated text tends to cluster around what's called high probability phrasing, right? Because it's looking for the most efficient route. So you got low variation, you got very predictable structure, It organizes the paragraphs in a certain way around a certain cadence. And as you know, because you're a writer, Russ, writing is the opposite. We have what's called one of my favorite terms, burstiness, which is the cadence of how we say things and the inflection. We have uneven rhythm. We have quirks. We have cadence. We have, we're messy. Humans are messy.
Yeah.
So all of this is to say AI doesn't write badly. It just writes averagely.
Yeah.
And average is the enemy of attention. So I think once an audience feels this is the bigger risk here. Once an audience feels that something is synthetic, even if it's not, you've lost something significant, trust.
Yeah.
And trust for nonprofits is our most valuable currency.
Right.
You can see how these kind of dominoes play out in what we think is making us more efficient at churning out content, having long-term impact and effects.
So, Josh, as we're talking about this trust issue, right, and these dominoes falling, people are out there, they're using AI. And I think one of the things that prompted this whole discussion and this idea for this episode was that I was seeing a lot of folks just turn to AI for their entire content of a story, right?
Yeah.
And they use AI as kind of the primary source, which is a huge red flag.
Right.
And so can you speak to that a little bit as kind of looking to AI as a primary source?
Yeah, well, I think AI is incredibly powerful for strategy, for synthesis, for planning, even in helping you think through maybe audience segmentation or framing on stories themselves. But what you're talking about is where most people get tripped up, which is not looking at AI as a thought partner, but instead as the storyteller itself.
Yeah.
And so going back to, like issues of style, right? What you're going to get back is going to be structured even in a subtly inhuman way. And so what we have is two issues. One, we have a story that reads inauthentic and just doesn't come across. Even if you can't pinpoint exactly what is off, you know something's off.
Yeah, it just doesn't feel right.
That's why I think that analogy is so on point, because there's just a little trace element that's just not hitting.
Yeah.
And we know it in our soul, right?
Yeah.
And then the second thing, right, of what you're talking about is that once it goes out in the world, we're all starting to sound the same and nobody is sounding human anymore.
Yeah.
So for us, whether it's talking about an appeal letter or talking about a call to action on a website, right? What makes us effective isn't just that emotional component that we talked about with that first thing. It's also that we stand out from the crowd, that we are differentiated from the noise, especially now. And so if everything sounds the same, it's just adding to that static.
Right.
And people are going to just gloss over you completely. Even if they have a relationship, a pre-existing relationship with you, they're just going to gloss over because it sounds like everything else.
In light of that challenge, what do you think is the biggest opportunity for nonprofits to grow and improve?
So I think the biggest opportunity is because we can generate faster, right, is looking at it as a thought partner in developing what are our beats. How do we want to structure this? How can we synthesize our argument in a tight way?
Yeah.
I often recommend if clients are going to go this route, then they spend as much time in AI refining as they do outside AI editing.
Okay.
So they have to add that human component. They have to make sure that it sounds like people talk, but it also don't go with the first results that it gives back.
Yeah.
Fine tune it, work with it, right? You should have multiple prompts to get at your final product instead of just what most folks who are very resource strapped and pressed for time have been doing, which is I'm going to dump in some of my past material. Maybe I'll throw in some of my appeal letters and a grant that we wrote, and I'm going to ask it to give back a story. And maybe it'll make up the story. Maybe it'll give back a story that I've shared, pulled directly from a grant proposal. And then I'm going to just use that, and I'm going to drop that into my appeal letter and send it off. And whoo, I just saved 2 weeks of work, right?
Yeah, right.
But the thing is, appeal letters are dependent on cultivating that relationship and also cultivating an emotional response. We want people to feel things when they read that content, right?
Yeah.
And so we are shortchanging the process across the board in that. I do think that how it's been used effectively is in that kind of strategic thing, in what I mentioned earlier, as far as like audience segmentation. You can do a lot of variations with your content that, would have been more labor and time intensive previously, but don't just go for the first response.
Okay. So let's talk about that a little bit more. What is AI really good at? I mean, we know from using it that it's good at filtering a lot of information, right? You can feed it a ton of information, and the vast amount of content that you feed it might take you days or weeks to go through, and AI can go through it super fast. Yeah. So that saves you time, right? AI is great at that. AI for me, in some of the ways that I use it, is a great way for me to go through an entire client's codex of appeals, right? I can go through 3 years worth of appeals and get a very good understanding of the lexicon that they've used over those 3 years. Get a great understanding of what their vocabulary has been, what the sentiment has been, and how they've been communicating with their donors. Get a kind of a summary of that, which would take me days and days and days of trying to do that manually. What other ways do you think AI is useful and helpful? Because this isn't an episode where we're going to completely poo-poo AI, right? There are useful examples, but it's a way for us to kind of drill down a little bit and say, hey, this is maybe the more ethical and beneficial way to use it, and in a way that you can use it where you can sleep at night as a nonprofit professional.
So I think I err more on the side of being an enthusiast than a poo-pooer. And when you were talking in your intro about setting up those lines of not crossing, I have to manage myself pretty closely.
Sure. Yeah.
So that I don't default to that.
Right. Especially as it gets better and better. Right. I find myself doing the same thing. Right. Like I really am getting very enthusiastic about how far it's come, especially in the last year and a half. It's gotten great. Like there are some great things that you can do with it.
100%. So I think the example that you gave in the question is really one of the ways that it's highly effective. I think strategy, right? And also strategy in terms of what I was talking about earlier, audience segmentation, right? Different audiences respond in different ways to different content. Sometimes we have to shift the language a little bit around what our audience's values are, what they're prioritizing, right? Yeah. That is far easier with AI, right? Because now, as with the example that you just gave, we can do a mass dump into AI and segment, this will resonate more with these folks. This will resonate more with these folks. Yeah. That gives us something to draw from, but that should be the starting point, right?
Right.
In which we elaborate on further. So I think it's really good at strategy. I think it's really good at synthesis. I think it's really good at surveying the landscape, where often in organizations or advising organizations, we have significant blind spots. But that actual delivery of the story itself, that has to have human touch. And I think there are practical, tactical reasons for that, which I'll can elaborate on. And I think there's also ethical reasons.
Okay.
And so the practical, tactical, I often say in my workshops that every story actually has 3 layers to it. There is the story that I'm telling you, Russ. There is the story that I'm signaling, right? So what the story is actually about. The story I tell you is da 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 da. What the story is actually about is how amazingly cool I am. And then the third is how you actually receive that story.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And AI compromises all 3 of those layers.
Yeah. Interesting.
But it's that last layer that really jeopardizes that trust component.
Yeah.
And the more overtly ethical is that when somebody, a client, a participant, a beneficiary of our organizations or programs shares and entrusts us with their story, and then we take that story and we dump it into a machine to synthesize it and process it in the most effective way, that's both disrespectful and dangerous.
Yeah.
We are disrespecting and abusing the trust that they've invested in us as storytellers. And it's dangerous because it can actually add that distortion at scale, right? So now the story that's being told is now being statistically reshaped. And that's offensive and harmful on multiple layers.
Interesting. Yeah. Josh, what's a hard truth that nonprofit professionals need to face if they want to use AI ethically in their messaging, and especially as it pertains to storytelling?
Well, I think the hard truth is actually, even if, Russ, the content performs and we're hitting all the marks, if we lose what makes us human in our storytelling, we've failed.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a flip side to that too, which has to do with retention. So there's recent research that's come out that shows that this is pretty telling. 83.3% of ChatGPT users couldn't quote something that they had just written minutes earlier.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
This is on the writer side of things.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that's not just a memory or retention issue, right? That's a meaning issue, because we actually construct our thoughts based on how we're processing them on the page, or, if we're auditory storytellers, how we're processing them in real time.
Yeah.
And if you don't retain it, then you can't really stand behind it.
But Josh, what do you say to someone in a leadership position that says, you know what, we're gaining so many efficiencies that I look at this appeal that we just sent out and it's good enough, and they're okay with making that compromise?
So I think the risk there, which is always a fundamental risk in the trade-offs of efficiency, is, are your short-term gains jeopardizing, your long-term sustainability?
Yeah.
So maybe the first time that you send out an appeal that has used this, there won't be a backlash and you get an increase in donations even.
Right.
Awesome. But if you're continuing to rely on it, then most donors are probably receiving multiple asks from multiple organizations, and they're going to start to detect that, hey, all of these sound identical.
Yeah.
That's problematic. Here's the irony too, Russ, is that strong, confident, effective writers end up being your greatest asset.
Yeah.
Right? It circles back on itself, because then you stand out and differentiate yourself. So we're talking in a lot of abstractions, right, about the soul and what makes us human, but there are practical, tactical, tangible, pragmatic reasons to not lean too heavily on AI or on any tool.
Right.
And I think that's what I would tell that leadership is, do not make these short-term gains that could end up jeopardizing your long-term future.
Okay. So a good segue.
And Russ, can I add one more thing specifically about like this human component as being necessary to help shape the AI content? Is that a lot of the like now household name AI companies that most of us know have been hiring strategic communicators, journalists, reporters, and storytellers to help provide that human touch. So they recognized that they outstripped their own plans for content development, and that context is absolutely crucial to actually being able to deliver content that isn't just efficient and effective, but also human.
Oh, that's fascinating. So Josh, let me pose a hypothetical to you. We have a lot of listeners who work in smaller nonprofit organizations that don't have a lot of resources. Say you're in a small nonprofit organization, you're the executive director, and you've got an entire year's worth of appeals that you need to get out.
Yeah.
And you use AI to help you write those appeals. And AI has been able to produce some of the best appeals that you've written, but it's probably pulling you ethically into places that are a little uncomfortable. What would you say are some of the guardrails that that person should be watching out for?
Sure. I think fundamentally, big picture, practical advice, always put people first and actually operationalize that. So as an ethical checkpoint in the storytelling process that we're talking about, right? If you're using AI to generate a year's worth of appeals that you're about to send out, right? Make sure that you're going over them, sitting with them, not immediately spitting them out, folding them up and putting them in an envelope, right?
Yeah.
Actually process that, make sure that it is on message, and that ultimately you have, even if it's a couple lines that you're changing in the content, that is reflective of your human voice and the voice of the organization.
Yeah.
Verify every claim. So one of the problems with AI, and it's still true, as much as advanced as AI continues to get, it doesn't just generate, it hallucinates.
Yeah.
It will make up quotes. It will make up clients. If the most efficient way to make a point is to just create a composite, it will do that. And that, again, longer term, could jeopardize the trust that people place in your organization. And finally, I think it's very, very important, AI or not, to trust the story that somebody is sharing with us with the utmost respect. And we have talked about this in past episodes, Russ, that for me, I over err on the side of being extra cautious and extra cognizant of the story that's being entrusted to me, which means I don't send it out in any medium without first checking with the storyteller, the story sharer in the first place, to make sure that it's all right. If we have told it in our newsletter, that doesn't mean we get to repurpose it in our appeal letter without checking it. And that certainly doesn't mean that we need to or are given a free pass to just feed it into ChatGPT, right?
Yeah. So I wonder, for those listening, how many folks have updated their consent forms to include permissions regarding AI? A lot of the times when you're working in an organization, that's something that marketing and communications handles, because typically they're the story gatherers, right? They're the folks who are out there speaking with people. And if you have a gala, they'll be talking with folks and capturing video and capturing stories. And you know, at the end of the event, they're kind of the keepers of all that content, right? But they are often the ones who get the sign off for the permissions to use that. But I think going forward, that's something that, as you think about getting those permissions, we all have to think about AI, right? We have to think about how it's going to be used. Do those pieces of content get permission to be fed into AI for later use? And what does that look like, right? What do those permissions look like?
And I would just want to, not that we want to open a whole can of worms on this as well.
Yes.
But I do want to pull that thread a little more and say, this cannot just be a box that you check. Are you okay with your likeness? Are you okay with, your story? Are you okay with us feeding it into AI. Because the thing that is going back to what is potentially dangerous about putting somebody's story in is it can and will, if it makes efficient sense to do so, distort somebody's lived experience into something that it thinks, oh, this is going to get more donations, or this is going to get, greater impact, or this is going to move XYZ policy.
Yeah.
And so now we are in very dangerous, very murky territory where it's literally distorting somebody's essence and personal story to get results.
Yeah.
And we don't want to be in that position.
We don't.
No organization, even if it's 3 people and all of them have 6 jobs apiece, we do not want to be in that position.
Yes. So wrapping it all the way back around to the very fundamental use of AI as you're writing your prompts, make sure that when you do feed any kind of quotes or anything in there that you're using for an appeal, make sure that your prompts are very specific in that they should not be changed. None of your quotes of donors should be changed. And that is content that always stays unaltered.
And I would also say, Russ, like, this is what I was alluding to with, staying in the chat with the document for more than just the first product that's produced, is push it.
Yeah.
Test it.
Yep.
Ask questions of it. There are all sorts of things where, like, you can say, why are you making this choice instead of this one?
Yeah.
Engage with it in that way to get better. And honestly, I would say better, more nuanced, and ideally more ethical results than just accepting that first draft that it gives back to you.
So, Josh, if you could leave our listeners with just one piece of lasting advice to help avoid some of these ethical problems that we've discussed, what would it be, and how can they start addressing it right away?
Yeah. What it would be is that piece of always putting people first. And so that should be the question or questions that you're asking, and operationalize that. Even setting up ethical checkpoints in your storytelling process that you're making sure your story sharers, story carriers, past donors or clients or participants will still see themselves in what you're generating, right? That it is not distorting. So putting all of the fail safes of asking, what is the human touch point on this?
Yeah.
Whether it's stylistic or the content itself.
Yeah. And making sure that those fail safes don't just live in your head.
Operationalize them.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Operationalize. Yes. Because we all know in the nonprofit world, especially, folks tend to move on, right? You're not always there for 20 or 30 years in the same place. So make sure that the person who comes next knows to do that and has that information so that they can carry forward and use that information. And so despite the ethical pitfalls that we've talked about today and the potential misuse of AI, we know that there are a lot of good things. So what gives you hope about the future of fundraising and philanthropy, particularly as we advance technology that helps us create and share stories with one another?
The first thing that gives me hope is the fact that people are already being able to discern the difference and to know what is authentic and what resonates with them, which again gives those of us who are writers or storytellers or have that tendency, the opportunity to stand out even further, because that is going to be a differentiator. So that's the first thing. I think the second thing is that it will create far more time for us. So as it gets better, as it gets more skilled, our role and how we engage is going to change and adapt as well. And I think there is a lot of opportunity and hope in there for maximizing the results in the most human, humane, and impactful way possible.
Josh, what an awesome conversation. So if listeners want to continue this conversation with you and maybe even connect with you one-on-one, what's the best way for them to reach out?
Probably just on my website, oddduck.io, or josh@oddduck.io.
Excellent. Josh Gryniewicz, Chief Narrative Strategist at Odd Duck LLC, a frequent guest on this podcast and host of his own series on narrative strategy here on NPFX. Thank you for joining me today. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. Love it.
Thanks also to our producer, Curtis Schmidt. And thanks to you, NPFX listeners, for tuning in. We'll see you next time on the Nonprofit Fundraising Exchange. That concludes this episode of the Nonprofit Fundraising Exchange. If you'd like to learn more about any of today's guests or resources, we'll include links in the show notes. If you like our podcast, please help spread the word. First, subscribe in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite app so you always know when a new episode is released. Second, forward episodes you like to friends and colleagues or post them on social media. Word of mouth is one of the best ways you can help share these conversations with more nonprofit professionals like yourself. And if you use Apple Podcasts or Audible, please leave us a review. Positive reviews are how many listeners find us, and they also help us understand what you like most about NPFX. Finally, we'd love to hear your suggestions. If there's a challenge you're facing, a question you have, or a voice you think the nonprofit sector needs to hear, send an email with the subject heading NPFX suggestion to contact@ipmadvancement.com. The Nonprofit Fundraising Exchange is just that, an exchange, and we're grateful that you're part of it. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.